Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I appreciate it. How is everyone? Excellent, great. As Chris mentioned, my name's John Horrigan, and tonight, with this subject, you can go anywhere. Unidentified flying objects, I can go anywhere with it. So I thought, what if I chose some selected photographs over the past, say, 100 years, and then pulled some videos that have shown up on the internet, and give you a, what do you think? So, a little background about me. I'm the host, writer, and co-creator of a 9-time Boston, New England Emmy Award-winning TV show called The Folklorist. We've been very successful with 9 Emmy Awards with photographer, director. I worked with 2 very talented people. I won for performer, narrator, and writer. The show also won for editor and director in 2015. 2014, historical cultural program. I won for host moderator in 2013. A weak field, obviously, and then promotion program in 2012. So 28 nominations over the past 5 years, 17 Telly Awards, 11 Communicator Awards, and then we placed first nationally in back-to-back years, 2015 and 2016, in arts and entertainment in the Alliance of Community Media. But it was a critically acclaimed show that nobody was watching. We got canceled in September of 2016. So it was a nice run. A lot of great bells and whistles to put on my resume. This past June, I happened to be nominated for host, moderator, performer, narrator, and best historical program, but unfortunately, we lost. So, and my directors were also nominated. So I've been called many things, some that I can't say in public, but a time traveler driving without a license. I'm also a professional sports announcer, having been with the Boston Bruins alumni as their announcer, traveling from town to town, doing fundraising hockey games for this is my 25th season. I've also had the opportunity to announce a Boston Red Sox game at Fenway Park on the public address. And I've worked with the Toronto Maple Leafs, Montreal Canadiens alumni programs. And believe it or not, I'm the New England Patriots basketball announcer when we do fundraising basketball games from April through June in the eastern Massachusetts area. And I've also done several comedy basketball games with the Harlem Rockets, the Harlem Wizards, the Harlem Hoopsters, the Court Jesters, the Harlem Magicians, etc., etc. So, I'm also a historian, belonging to the Historical Society of Watertown, Marshfield Historical Society, Waltham Historical Society. I belong to the Society in Dedham for the Apprehension of Horse Thieves. And for over 200 years, they have looked for horse thieves and they haven't caught any. But they have a great banquet every year with lots of great food and friends. So, also an economic historian. I used to march with the Lincoln Minutemen. Carpal tunnel, plantar fasciitis on the heel prohibits me. And I also do a mediocre portrayal of Alexander Hamilton for Solo Together. After the play Hamilton came out, I thought it would be nice to retire that. So, but I have over 100 lectures in my lecture portfolio, and I've been called a pocket historian. Now, an axiom I like to mention, first of all, we know about emergency exits right through here. There's always somebody in attendance who knows more about the subject than I do, and somebody who thinks that they know more about the subject than I do. So I'm just going to ask you to hold your questions until the end if you could, and then I can give you evasive answers to pointed questions. So we're going to look at a history of UFO photographs to see how I juxtapose the F. What is a UFO? We're going to look at something known as airship flaps in the late 19th century and early 20th century. UFOs emerging in World War II and post-World War II, which launched us into the modern UFO era. Then we'll look at the 1950s, some space UFOs. So again, tonight's lecture, it's up to you to believe. I'm not here to tell you whether these are real or not. I have my own personal beliefs. The universe, depending upon who you speak with, is 4.25, 4.5, 4.62 billion years old. Earth itself is 1.5, 1.2, 1 billion years old. So there is consideration that there are advanced civilizations that had a billion or 2 billion year head start on us. And I always like to say that if I'm at the cutting edge of fossil fuel technology, when I get into my RAV4, with all the dashboard lights on it, by the way, and go up to 70 miles an hour on fossil fuel, if that's the cutting edge of technology in the universe, it's a pathetic universe, right? So, and we have to, as Jacques Vallée, who's a venture capitalist, computer scientist, author, ufologist, and former astronomer out of San Francisco, and he was portrayed in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, vague portrayal, these French scientists, but he says, and I love this, we have to understand that we may not be able to understand. All right? Take the human variable out of the equation. So I like to look up into the heavens at night, and I'm an amateur astronomer, although I was talking with Chris about my vision now. I need 10 different pairs of glasses because I can't see here. But if you look at some of the stars that are 10, 20, 200 light years away, and it's one massive equation. So, okay. So what's an unidentified flying object? Well, an unidentified flying object, or UFO, is in its strictest definition any apparent object in the sky that is not identifiable as a known object or phenomenon, but the term is widely used in popular culture to refer more specifically to supposed observations of craft of extraterrestrial origin. Lenticular clouds, for instance. Temperature inversions, which was used in the 1950s. Most UFOs are later identified as conventional objects or phenomena, such as aircraft, weather balloons, and we'll talk about that, and clouds. But some of them are not identified, either because of lack of evidence or because no conventional explanation can be found despite extensive evidence. Some people consider the latter cases as possible observations of extraterrestrial spacecraft. So let's do a survey of the earliest known photographs of unidentified flying objects, and we'll go through them, and then I'll take you up to some videos, and then we'll open the floor for discussion. Again, this lecture could be 45 minutes, which I intend tonight, 2 hours, or 7 days, your choice. So first, this is taken in 1870, north of us, Mount Washington. It's been called the oldest UFO photograph ever taken. This was originally a stereo photograph. Now, before photography, there were daguerreotypes, before Matthew Brady took photography into magnificent photographs and disturbing photographs of the Civil War. But certainly it was difficult to manipulate photos at that time in 1870. And remember, there were no flying objects then, at least not from this world. And I'll give you a brief survey of the history of hot air ballooning in just a second. But you can see it here, and I'll point it out. Can you see the arrow here? Can you see that arrow there? Yep. Okay. So here's the object, which looks to be in front of a cloud bank off of Mount Washington. Cylindrical in shape, cigar-shaped, and you'll see that description quite often. Mystery airships, or phantom airships, are a class of unidentified flying objects best known from a series of newspaper reports originating in the western United States and spreading eastward during late 1896 and 1897. Mystery airship reports are seen as a cultural predecessor to modern claims of extraterrestrial piloted flying saucer-style UFOs. Now, this is something, I created a web page. The internet is forever, ladies and gentlemen. I created a web page on Angel Fire in 1997. It's 20 years old and it's still up. I can't log into it because the passwords are long gone and the email address that I had at CompuServe, I think it was. But there are depictions. People were reportedly seeing these odd craft flying through the skies, and this is before known lighter-than-air travel was commercially available or industrially available. And, of course, it could be hysteria. I saw one, too, because my neighbor saw it. I saw it, too. But they were performing odd maneuvers, had bright lights on the nose or on the side, and they hovered, which was very, very strange, that they could actually hover in the air. But typical airship reports during this period involved unidentified lights, but more detailed accounts reported ships comparable to what we would call a dirigible of today. And there were also reports of the alleged crewmen and pilots usually describing them as human-looking, although sometimes the crew claimed to be from Mars, according to the witnesses. Here's another depiction. So you can see there's there's some sort of gondola or cabin beneath them, and you can see the different depictions with a bright light. And they began in the late 1896 in San Francisco and Sacramento, and the sightings moved eastward to Omaha, Nebraska, and then eventually to Chicago, where they're eventually abated. But it's called the Mystery Airship Flap of 1896 and 1897. Had we gone on with the folklorist, I would have pushed for a segment about that. Now, in 1897, also, a story, a folklore, that allegedly says that a UFO crashed into a windmill owned by a judge in Aurora, Texas, sometime in 1897, and the occupant or occupants, depending upon whose research you read, were buried in a local cemetery. And then when researchers went looking for the remains in the 1990s, they were subsequently removed. This is supposedly a UFO taken in the year 1897 in a windmill, although I think it's superimposed. But this supposedly was the tombstone of the buried occupant or occupants of the alleged UFO crash that crashed into a windmill in 1897. I like to say, if you believe, I probably don't. If you don't believe, I probably do. My wife calls me a contrarian. But there are various mystery airship flaps, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, namely England, in Ireland, Wales, in 1896, 1897, 1908, 1909, 1912, 1913, 1915. Now, the first UFO sighting in New England happened on Halloween night, believe it or not, 4 in the morning. 2 undertakers in Bridgewater, Mass. Coming home saw this odd light performing these strange maneuvers in the sky. And subsequently, the following year, and actually Christmas Eve of 1908 and Christmas Eve, actually it was Christmas Eve of 1909, thousands of people witnessed these odd lights in the sky across Massachusetts. Communities like Needham, Natick, for instance, saw them, Somerville, and Charlestown. In fact, Charlestown is allegedly the first encounter of an unidentified flying object in Massachusetts after the Anglo-Saxons arrived. And it was seen in an area called Muddy River, which is an estuary of the Mystic. And a man reported seeing it. The only thing that he could relate the lights to was the form of a swine. Obviously, the man was a hog farmer, but that was the correlation that he could make. So, during this time, 1909, and let's not forget, the Wright brothers flew in 1903. Count von Zeppelin would do his first experimental flights in Lake Geneva in 1900. And backing up the Montgolfier brothers, who flew before Thomas Jefferson and did a demonstration, and also John Adams just prior to the French Revolution, 1789. Henri Giffard would do his lighter-than-air experimentation in 1852. And then you'll have, I'll go over that in a second, other early aviators that devised these lighter-than-air craft that we have come to know as dirigibles or blimps. But here's a depiction of what was seen in 1909, and you can see it looks like some sort of cruise ship with high masts and sails on them, and that these ships have spotlights on them in the harbor. But David Schwartz was an early inventor of lighter-than-air craft. Count von Zeppelin, as I mentioned, flew his experimental blimp for the first time in 1900. Dr. Karl Wolfert was also flying dirigible prototypes after the first steam-powered balloon was flown by Henri Giffard in 1852. And of course, as I mentioned, the Montgolfier brothers flew in 1789 in Paris. So you can see some of these early, and for lack of a better term, gas bags that were flown. That's to the right is Schwartz's vehicle, and on the left is Dr. Karl Wolfert's. So aviation was known at the time. It was a breathtaking time to be alive. And the Wrights, Orville and Wilbur, when they flew at Kitty Hawk in 1903, were so paranoid that somebody would steal their design, and copyright theft was so prevalent, especially during the late 19th century in the industrial age. They kept it close to the vest, and eventually they were surpassed in aviation by other inventors. But let's just take a look at this. This is one of the earliest photographs of an unidentified flying object. This picture was taken somewhere in the United States during the 1920s. I wish that I could be more vague and ambiguous than that. But it's obviously in a cornfield, which could be anywhere from New England out to California. But it was taken in the U.S., and you can see the object. I don't know if you can see this speck or smudge in the right-hand side. And again, these could be certainly surface defects on the film, on the lens, etc. Somebody throwing a corn husk. So this is taken in Oregon, 1927, at Cave Junction. Now, we're not sure if this was taken in 1926 or 1927, probably 1927. But if this is an authentic photograph, it's incredible, and it was reportedly snapped by a volunteer fireman in Oregon. And you can see it here. And it's that prototypical archetypal shape of a saucer or almost like a hat. This is taken in a place called Pine, Colorado, at Ward Sawmill, 1929 in April. And according to the photographer's daughter, she said, "This photo was taken by my father, Edward Pline, at the sawmill in Ward, where we lived at the time. I think it was 1929. I was about 6 years old then. My father was there to photograph the sawmill for some reason or another. And as he was taking the photo, he described a terrible, thunderous bellow and a very large round thing as big as a very large boulder that moved through the air above them." You can see the blow up here, this object that's airborne. She said, "None of the sawmill workers saw the thing in the photo, but they all heard the sound and felt the ground shudder. It's almost like a sonic boom. Later in my life, I tried researching the incident at the County Historical Society, but I did not find any references to it. My father passed away a few years after the incident, and I have not found any surviving sawmill workers from that time." Signed, Hetty Pline, daughter. St. Paris, Ohio, 1932. Mr. George Sutton, they took a photograph of him near noon in May of 1932 in front of his car, and you can tell it's a model 1930s, and from the license plate here. And they say that this unidentified flying object in the picture could not have been a street lamp. And it doesn't look like a street lamp. We're talking about this object up here. Simply because there were no street lamps at that time in this area. And there were no power poles or power lines visible anywhere in this picture. So it would take a while for the entire nation to be wired for electricity. And still there were some rural areas, even in the 1930s, that had no power or no power source to tap into in rural America. Now, here's an interesting one. This was taken by an American photographer in Tianjin-Hebei province in China in approximately the year 1942. And it appears that, with the exception of this man, but these folks are looking at the object in the sky. Again, could be a smudge, lens flare, speck of dust on the lens. And something like this lives in perpetuity. If somebody says that's a UFO, they hold on to it, and somebody says that's a UFO because he said it was a UFO. Well, that's a UFO because she did, and he said that. So it tries to gain its own authenticity. But again, several people appear to be, like this gentleman here, can you see the arrow pointing to the object? So, and of course, during that 1942, China, the population of China was literally run out of their villages from the eastern coast during the horrific Japanese occupation. This is a famous one. It's Los Angeles air raid, and it began February 24th through February 25th, 1942 in Los Angeles. Now, I've done a lot of research with phantom air raids, and Pearl Harbor took place, as you know, on December 7th, 1941. Well, the next day, there were air raid sirens that went off in Boston, in Washington, D.C., in New York City. In fact, there's a headline from the New York Eagle Tribune that I found, and I don't have it in my slide deck on this presentation, that says, New York-bound planes routed and forced out to sea by American planes. Now, the Germans did not have an operational aircraft carrier in the Atlantic Ocean in 1942. They never had one during the war. They had something known as, I think, the Graf Zeppelin. They just had the hull, but it was never completely fitted out. So I know that the air raid sirens went off in Boston in December 8th, 1942, that some children were sent home from school that day. I've had people that have attended my lectures and said that we were sent home that day. There's probably a lot of fear in the air, no different from September 12th, 2001, when we heard aircraft go overhead or F-15s going at top level. So move forward to February now of 1942, late February, and our anti-aircraft defenses and systems were primitive compared to what the Japanese and the Germans had at that time. Well, late on the evening of February 24th, 1942, and into the early morning hours of February 25th, 1942, at approximately 2:25 a.m., AAC, AAA, anti-aircraft batteries began firing. They would expend over 1,000 rounds. I've looked at studies that said over 1,500 rounds. Some of the records show that 6 people died, 3 of a heart attack, 1 in a car accident, the other 3 with falling shrapnel. There's a documentary that I'm waiting to come out. It's been in production for like 7 years. Sounds like something I'd work on. But there are people that saw this discoidal object, and you can see these are AAC bursts, but you can see the spotlights triangulating this object, and it certainly looks like your typical UFO, saucer shaped with some sort of bell dome. And the reports were that they fired shells at this object, and one witness says he could actually hear the ping of a ricochet as if it were off steel. But the alarm sirens blare and a blackout is declared as anxious and terrified residents follow the instructions by turning off all the lights. At 3:16 a.m., anti-aircraft guns open fire on the unidentified flying objects coming from the ocean, and projector beams are searching the sky. Witnesses observe small objects flying at high altitude or of red or silver plated color, moving in formation at high speed and untouched by the AAA salvos. So the official explanation by the Army Air Force, there was no Air Force at the time, was it was a balloon, misidentified a balloon. Now a blimp, do you think 1,500 rounds of AAC could take down a blimp? Certainly could. But the object slowly moved off the coast and out to sea. Now, I will tell you that in February of 1942 also that a Japanese submarine surfaced off the coast of California and lobbed some shells into a Santa Barbara oil field. So, but this is a documented event. We did a segment on it on the Folklorist called the Los Angeles Air Raid. If you want to look it up online, you would be probably viewer 27 because I've looked at it 26 times. I go to these videos, my lectures, look at that, 52 views since 2010. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's probably me visiting once a month to see how many people viewed the video. So we're in wartime now. This is taken on October 29, 1942, Washington, D.C. And you can see this object here to the far right of the screen. It seems to be emitting some sort of, I don't know if that's a lens flare, solar glare, or reflection, or if it's some sort of exhaust, but you can see the Pentagon still with the construction underway here. And Washington, D.C. looks far different today. But it was taken above, and the object in the far right was originally thought to represent a high-wing monoplane flying down and right to the upper left-hand corner, but it's too fast for the shutter. Now, monoplanes were very slow at that time, and then I don't even think that you could call something a monoplane in the 40s, but it's more disc-like, and it's followed by an exceptionally long dark streak. Again, could be, you have to take these into consideration, it could be a smudge on the lens or a film defect. Foo Fighters. Has anybody heard of the David Grohl's band Foo Fighters? He used to play with Nirvana. Well, that was this is taken in 1944 in England, and of course the Germans in 44 and 45 were launching V1 and V2 vengeance weapons, rockets into London, but this is apparently a discoidal object and not a V1 or a V2. But the term Foo Fighters was used by Allied aircraft pilots in World War II, and we're finding out also Germans saw them, and even some Japanese pilots saw them during World War II. And it was used to describe various UFOs or mysterious aerial phenomena seen in the skies over both the European and Pacific theaters of operations. It was named after this nonsense word called foo, which emerged in a popular culture during the early 1930s, first being used by cartoonist Bill Hallman, who peppered his Smokey Stover fireman cartoon strips with foo signs and puns. So that's where it came from. But if you look at some of these pictures here, you know, these bright lights here, and again, this is a famous photograph here, and these are not American aircraft. They look like they're Italian aircraft, and the Italians would have flown these when their Air Force was operation late 1930s, early 1940s. Here's another photograph showing these weird lights, and again, they could be aberrations on the film, and then this sort of glowing object. But there have been many, many reports collected from pilots who flew during World War II, and for that matter, in the Korean War as well. In fact, this is a B-47, and peculiar as this one is, and this hung in my cellar as a youth. My father had this photograph, and I never noticed this object. There wasn't an arrow on it, but this object in the right-hand corner, and they blew it up, this insert here, and it just shows some sort of, again, discoidal object following this bomber. And then here, these are the Japanese bombers here, and this round object almost looks like some sort of flying saucer on edge. But those are known as Foo Fighters. And also in the 1940s, this is a famous picture taken in Burbank featuring Jack LaMond filming a movie on a horse with an object in the background. This object right here, if you can see that. And then at the end of the war, a phenomenon known as Scandinavian ghost rockets began to occur. They were rocket or missile-shaped unidentified flying objects sighted in 1946 in Scandinavia, mostly in Sweden and Finland. And the first reports of ghost rockets were made on February 26, 1946 in Finland, and about 2,000 sightings were logged between May and December 1946, with the peaks on August 9th and 11th, 1946. Now, 200 sightings were verified with radar returns, and authorities recovered physical fragments which were attributed to ghost rockets. But some investigators concluded that many ghost rocket sightings were probably caused by meteors. For example, the peaks of the sightings on the 9th and 11th of August 1946 also fall within the peak of the annual Perseid meteor shower. Now, I'm an amateur astronomer, don't know every object in the eye, but the Perseids, they're cyclical in terms of their brightness. First of all, you can't see them in the day or the afternoon, like this photograph was taken. It's usually well after midnight, emanating from the constellation Perseus. And just looking at peak times of the Perseid meteor showers, when we can look back in time over the past 200 years, 1946 was not a peak year. In fact, it was minimal for Perseid. So I kind of discount that particular explanation for Scandinavian ghost rockets. But most ghost rocket sightings did not occur during meteor shower activity. And furthermore, they displayed characteristics inconsistent with meteors, such as reported maneuverability. In 1946, however, it was very likely that they originated from the former German rocket facility at Peenemünde. Okay? And they reasoned that these missile sightings were long-range tests being conducted by the Russians of captured German V-1s or V-2 missiles. And this prompted the Swedish Army to issue a directive stating that newspapers were not to report the exact locations of any ghost rocket sightings. The Cold War had begun, remember, or any information relating to the direction or speed of the object. In fact, this gentleman here, one of the Swedish scientists, found debris in the lake. So this information, they realized, was vital for evaluation purposes and to national security. Now, just to back up on that, the way that countries would react, the Japanese launched balloon bombs, high-altitude balloon bombs in the late 1940s and early 1945, late 1944, early 1945. And it's thought that they launched nearly 10,000 of them. Now, at that time, we had just barely gotten our arms around what was known as a jet stream. High-altitude bombers would feel a tailwind at high altitude, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 feet. And the Japanese would just release these indiscriminately up into the upper atmosphere, and the trade winds would carry them across the Pacific to the United States. Now, this was a matter of national security and utmost secrecy, and the Army, Air Force, the Army would, if they heard of any of these reports, they'd quickly collect the debris so as not to let the Japanese know, number one, that they're reaching the continental United States, and number two, not to panic any residents of America. There was one family that found one of these balloon bombs that in Oregon. It had landed near a picnic site, and a child had pulled on it, and I believe it killed over 5 people. And then in terms of how far did they reach into the interior of the United States, they did find balloon bomb debris in Iowa. So, and that gives you insight to how perhaps the Army would react just a few years later in 1947 at Roswell. So the modern UFO era begins on June 24th, 1947. A private pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold claims that he saw a string of 9 shiny unidentified flying objects, I hate saying unidentified, UFOs, flying past Mount Rainier at speeds that he estimated at 1,200 miles per hour. Now, Arnold was not prone to exaggeration, just a normal pilot. In fact, he was out on a reconnaissance mission looking for another downed aircraft at the time. And after this sighting, on June 24th, 1947, sightings over the next 3 weeks across the United States exploded. Everybody was reporting seeing them. In fact, this is a photograph of objects seen over Tulsa, I believe on July 12th, 1947. So now he's credited with coining the term flying saucer. But years later, he claimed that he told Bill Beckett, who was a reporter of the East Oregonian in Pendleton, Oregon, that, quote, they flew erratic, like a saucer, if you skip it across the water. Arnold felt that he had been misquoted since the description referred to the object's motion rather than their shape. Thus, Beckett has often been credited with first using the term flying saucer and supposedly misquoting Kenneth Arnold, but the term does not appear in Beckett's early articles. Instead, his first article, which appears the following day on June 25th, 1947, says, quote, he said he sighted 9 saucer-like aircraft flying in formation. Now to Roswell. Let me back up on just some of my experience. I'm a historian now and an ad hoc historian. But back in the 90s, when the X-Files was all the rage, early 90s and actually late 1980s, I had a crush on Scully. And I had a Beetle Gretel haircut here, down to here. And driving across, I went to Roswell 3 times. In 1995, 96, 98. I went to Area 51. In fact, I can say that I was on the grounds of Area 51 before the government seized the land. So you can no longer go on that. I went to Gulf Breeze, Florida, which was the site of some spectacular photographs that we won't look at tonight. It's another lecture I have by a man named Ed Walters in Gulf Breeze, Florida, which is near Pensacola, northwest Florida. And where else have I been? Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Didn't see any aliens. I went to the San Luis Valley, exploring a phenomenon known as cattle mutilation. Been to England, looking at crop circle formations. All right, I'll come out. Bigfoot hunting in the Pacific Northwest. Loch Ness. All right, so, but it's just chasing, and it was before the internet. You only had books. And only a few people were publishing these books, and it was a really great time to be an investigator. And I remember going to Roswell in 1995 and looking at a map on the wall, huge map, Bureau of Land Management. And I saw this tiny X written in pencil. And I called the curator over, and I said, well, what's that X? I don't know. Is that the debris field? So they said, well, call up so-and-so, and he's an archaeologist, and this other guy, Dan, will take you out there. We went out there, and I actually was trodden upon the debris field. This is before there were alternate crash sites. So anyways, they say that a UFO crashed at Roswell on July 4th, 1947. This past year, I went back and investigated Roswell, and I wanted to go back to the original testimony by the original witnesses. A lot of people have backdated themselves into the story. Their testimony does not jive with the others. It doesn't fit together. And not to say that a UFO didn't crash, but again, back to my opening remarks, and not to put them in godlike status, but if they came all the way across the universe, right, or across the galaxy, I'll give them that, not out of the solar system, and look out, Maltar, look out for that mountain. They always crash into the sides of mountains. It's like, really? I mean, they warp time and space, and they crash. And then, of course, the folklore says that the government comes in, threatens everybody's secrecy. They cart off these alien bodies. They're locked up either in Area 51, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I bought into that. And it was only until this year I just said, wait a minute. And I went back into the testimony, and I'll just touch on that. And I'm not sure. I'm sure that some strange debris came down at Roswell because the way the Army Air Force reacted, put this in boxes, fly it to Carswell Army Airfield in Texas, fly it to Wright Field in Ohio, for all of these high-ranking officers and military men to misidentify what they would later claim as a weather balloon really sheds light on their incompetence. So what they found, the debris that they found, I'm still speculating as to what it was. Was it from this Earth? But in terms of an impacted flying saucer, dead aliens around there, 4 fingers, 6 fingers, alien autopsy footage, 1 dead, 2 alive, there's really no smoking gun, and we'll get to that. So, Mac Brazel, this guy here, had a ranch, the Foster Ranch, that he used to take his sheep out to, outside of Corona, New Mexico. And if you've been out to New Mexico, the dry, arid, desolate land, rolling, sloping draws and hills and everything, and you can see for miles. And what people don't get is, the original testimony by Brazel, if you look at the first newspaper accounts, he says that he came across the debris on or around June 14th, which precedes the Kenneth Arnold sighting by 10 days. But what was that? Oh, happy Roswell Debris Field Day on your birthday. So anyways, this is not the map, but Brazel reaches out to Roswell Army Airfield, says, and this is approximately the location of it. And I can drill down, and I actually have the coordinates, the GPS coordinates where the debris field is. But you can see it's Lincoln County, the Capitan Mountains, and here's Roswell. And to get out there, this is where some witnesses said there was a military operation cordoning off the area, preventing any access from any citizens. And I believe that. If this was, they probably enclosed the area. But he was upset because clean up, my sheep won't graze. Clean up, who's going to clean up this debris? It's what is this? It's got to belong to the Army Air Force. Somebody help me out. And he went in to see his neighbors, the Proctors. And Mac, you might have one of them flying saucers there. There's a reward. Cha-ching. There's a reward. So he goes into Roswell. But what he actually did is he actually went into the Weather Bureau at Roswell before he went to the sheriff's office, Chavez County. Sheriff Wilcox. Sheriff Wilcox says, well, you should call the Army Airfield. I'll get on, rings up the Army Airfield. He gets in touch with the counterintelligence agent named Jesse Marcel. Actually talks to the colonel, Colonel Blanchard. Blanchard sends out this guy, Jesse Marcel, along with this other CIC man who has been identified as Sheridan Cavett. So this guy here, Jesse Marcel, gets in a Jeep. Actually takes his own station wagon. They get a coverall to go out and meet Brazel. Now there's some conflicting testimony as to if they met Brazel out there, if he went with them, et cetera, et cetera. I've seen from different authors, but they come across this debris field, and again, the dimensions have been varied throughout the years, but hundreds of yards wide by maybe 3/4 of a mile long of debris. So, and this is taken from the film Roswell, which was released in 1994. Paul David's producer. Good film. Martin Sheen was in it, if you ever get to see it. But you can see if that was a weather balloon that left all that debris, it looks like it exploded, and that's the terminology that Brazel used. And he said that there was a gouge, and it pointed off to the southwest, which later would be an alternate flying saucer crash site, as cited by author Stanton Friedman, in a place called the Plains of San Augustine. And I've been out there a few times. And you get out of your car, you look for 2 things, rattlesnakes and scorpions, and water. It's near the VLA, the Very Large Array, which is a radio telescope out in Socorro, New Mexico. But anyways, that's another story. That's another lecture. But so they collect the debris, and it gets dark. They're still many miles out of town, and they decide to store it in the shed at the Foster Ranch. So apparently they were going to wait there, left the debris in the coverall vehicle, the station wagon, the Jeep, and spent the night there eating cold beans. And at first light, they were going to go out. But Jesse leaves and heads home. And what he does is he brings the debris to his house first, so the story goes, and he shows it to his son. And his son, Jesse, passed away, I believe, in the early 1980s, because the story came to the public's attention after a tabloid published the story in 1978 or 1979. And Stanton Friedman, while waiting to go on the air in Louisiana, the producer told him, you should talk to that Jesse Marcel. He lives just a few towns over, about the flying saucer crash at Roswell. And Stanton said, what? So he said that some of the debris that they had, you couldn't bend it, or you can bend it, but it would just revert back to its original shape. You couldn't dent it. You couldn't burn it. It was foil-like. And then he said that there were these odd I-beams, and the reason why he calls them I-beams, they're like, because if you look at them end on end, they look like an eye. And there were this weird writing, and this is Jesse's writing, of some sort of hieroglyphics or symbols on these I-beams. So he got to, this was spread out on the floor or on the kitchen table, and Jesse actually got to handle them. And Jesse just passed away, Jesse Jr., recently. Wow, Dad, where'd you get this? But they couldn't dent it or burn it, bend it. So then, a press release is issued by Walter Haut on July 8th, 1947. And as we say now, that's Walter Haut. The story goes viral. Now, in my research with Walter Haut, his commanding officer at Roswell Army Airfield was Colonel William Butch Blanchard. And Blanchard liked to get information out to the community. He wanted to integrate the base with people of the community of Roswell and surrounding towns. So if there were a parade, send this press release out. We're going to have a parade tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock. We're going to have the marching band. Got it? Yes, sir. And Walter would type it up. So Walter would have to fill in the details because he couldn't go back to Colonel Blanchard and say, sir, what did you mean by that? So apparently, and what I can tell is that Blanchard said to Walter, we found one of those flying saucer things out on a ranch. Write up a press release and let the people know. He just gave him vague details and walked away. So Walter now had to come up with this press release. So a lot of the detail and the Roswell event, we'll look at the press release, comes from Walter, not from Colonel Blanchard, not from Brazel himself. So, and we'll listen to this. But the many rumors, this is the first press release, and Walter wrote it. The many rumors regarding the flying disc became a reality yesterday when the intelligence office of the 509th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force, Roswell Army Airfield, was fortunate enough to gain possession of a disc through the cooperation of one of the local ranchers and the sheriff's office of Chaves County. Okay, true story in terms of the Mac Brazel and Sheriff Wilcox, but gained possession of a disc. Well, that's what Colonel said to me, right? The flying object landed on a ranch. Now, did you see that debris landed? Landed on a ranch near Roswell sometime last week. Not having phone facilities, the rancher stored the disc, okay, as if it's intact, until such time as he was able to contact the sheriff's office. Now, so this corroborates my feeling that he stored it for some time, June 14th, that he recovered. So, who in turn, the sheriff's office notified Major Jesse A. Marcel of the 509th Bomb Group Intelligence Office. Action was immediately taken, and the disc was picked up at the rancher's home. Not a true statement. It was picked up at that shed on the ranch. It wasn't at his home. It was inspected at the Roswell Army Airfield and was subsequently loaned by Major Marcel to higher headquarters. So poor Walter, he's got limited details. Yes, sir. And this is how he concocted the press release. And there's a lot of inconsistencies and just data that isn't true. Landed and storing it at his home. So let's listen to the actual radio broadcast.
Late this afternoon, a bulletin from
ABC Radio.
Justice of the widely publicized mystery of the flying saucers may soon be solved. Army Air Force officers reported that one of the strange discs had been found and inspected sometime last week. Our correspondents in Los Angeles and Chicago have been in contact with Army officials endeavoring to obtain all possible late information. Joe Wilson reports to us now from Chicago. The Army may be getting to the bottom of all this talk about the so-called flying saucers. As a matter of fact, the 509th Atomic Bomb Group headquarters at Roswell, New Mexico, reports that it has received one of the discs which landed on a ranch outside Roswell. The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico, and the rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazel was the man who discovered the saucer. Colonel William Blanchard of the Roswell Air Base refuses to give details of what the flying disc looks like. In Fort Worth, Texas, where the object was first sent, Brigadier General Roger Ramey says that it is being shipped by air to the AAF Research Center at Wright Field, Ohio. A few moments ago, I talked to officials at Wright Field, and they declared that they expect the so-called flying saucer to be delivered there, but that it hasn't arrived as yet. determined no one saw the object in the air, and he describes it as being made of some sort of tinfoil. Other Army officials say that further information indicates that the object had a diameter of about 20 to 25 feet, and that nothing in the apparent construction indicated any capacity for speed, and that there was no evidence of a power plant. The disc also appeared too flimsy to carry a man. Now, back to Taylor Graham.
Contradictions. So Ramey now is already trotting out the weather balloon or kite story, and whether he intended to walk it back because the phones were ringing off the hook, and with every telling, Walter picked up the phone. Oh yeah, and the disc landed. It was debris. They've got the diameter of 20 to 25 feet of all that debris. How can you do the forensics on that? That it's in this report was released via the press release of Walter that it's supposedly the flight has left Carswell and headed to Wright Field, which is current-day Wright-Patterson Airfield in Dayton, Ohio, or they sent two separate flights, one to Carswell and one to Wright Field. But either way, you can see there's discrepancies, contradictions, and hearsay, and I'm sure that at this point, General Ramey is saying, what the blank is going on here? He gets a call from one of his superior officers, General McMullen from Washington, D.C., and they're basically put the fire out, squash this story anyway, anyhow. But you can see that the balloon story is in its infancy when it said it was kite form, and he's actually describing the debris. So a lot of contradictions here. So here you have Blanchard on the left, right? He's in charge of Roswell Army Airfield. His superior, Roger Ramey, on the right, who's at Carswell Airfield. And it's a 509th Bomb Group, by the way, which is the first atomic wing in the United States. This is the atomic wing that dropped the bomb on Japan, 2 bombs on Japan. So they always say that if a UFO would come to Earth, right, it would go to the areas where there's cutting-edge science and research and development. And well, there's where the nuclear weapons were at that point in time, Roswell, which is just down the road by 100 miles or so from the White Sands Missile Range. So they were certainly in the right area. Others have cited that, there were 3 things that mankind or humankind did to alert the alien presence to our earthly presence. One was radio waves. They now estimate that Jack Benny's show has just gone past the nearest star, by the way. The rocket engine we could get off the mud ball, and of course nuclear weapons. So they were in the area where all that was taking place, high definition radar. So they fly it down there. Photos are taken now. Jesse Marcel holding up the debris. Now, Bill Moore, who was the first author, who came out with the first book with Charles Berlitz in 1980, Incident in Roswell, we'll look at the cover in a second, says that Jesse Marcel said that, well, they took photos of me with the real debris, and then they closed the door and they they walked me out of the room, and then they replaced the real debris with the debris of a weather balloon. It turns out that Jesse Marcel never said that to the author, Bill Moore, and there often it goes another strand of the story. But you can see Jesse here. He looks a bit humiliated, like, I'm the idiot that found a weather balloon and told everybody it's a flying saucer. He wasn't drummed out of the military. Walter Haut did leave the military within a year after that press release, though. So another photo here. Here's Marcel now with some of the debris. Now it certainly looks like tinfoil, like Ramey said. And I'm not defending the government. There certainly was a cover-up. I just don't know to what extent, but it does look tinfoil-like. Is that a weather balloon or debris from weather? Perhaps. Can you see any debris down here? They had it in cardboard boxes. There looks like to be some sort of fiber or wire here too, which is interesting because some of the stories about the Roswell debris was that Mac Brazel's son talked about was that they found what he didn't know what fiber optics were, but light coming through wire. And then this is Ramey with the man who identified, I believe his name is Newton, identifying the debris. Yep, that's a weather balloon. Yes, sir. Okay. And then people have looked at, there's another photo of Ramey holding this note, and it's like a Rorschach ink blot. People said they could see, the victims of the crash, bodies of dead aliens on the note, but again. So they walk the story back. General Ramey empties the Roswell saucer story. He retracts it. Government says at that time, Raw target balloon. In 1994, when the authors started publishing their books, they say it was part of Project Mogul, which is, you can see a long train, a balloon train here. And again, I guess, I could see some of that, the debris that we saw in those photographs certainly, I think, came from a weather balloon or a secret listening device. Project Mogul apparently was a high-altitude listening device to listen for atomic explosions by our nemesis in the early stages of the Cold War with the Russians. And then in 1997, during the 50th anniversary, they said that it was no crash test dummies that they found. So they're acknowledging, and this is strange too, well, yeah, they found bodies, but they were test dummies. And test dummies, I believe, according to Stanton Friedman, weren't used until the early 1950s. So, again, the government doesn't know what it knows, and it should have just stayed out of the story. But now people became more and more skeptical. 2 museums opened in Roswell. Many alleged witnesses came forward in the mid-1990s. One of them by the name of Frank Kaufman, a prolific liar, for lack of a weaker term, sends him off on a wild goose chase, says that the saucer impacted into a cliff on what was known as the Corn Ranch. And I met Sheila and Hub Corn, the ranchers who owned that area before it became a commercial $15 a look site. And then the competing museums, the International UFO Museum, which is, I think, the only one that's still in operation, I may be wrong, I haven't been to Roswell in nearly 20 years, says, no, we have a signed testimony from a witness on his deathbed who says it was at Boy Scout Mountain. And they went and bought the land at Boy Scout Mountain so they could charge a fee for people to go up there. So they claimed, these people that came forward claimed there was a flying saucer crash, alien bodies were recovered, and they were sworn or threatened to secrecy by the military. Kevin Randall came out with, his second book was The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. It used to be the UFO crash at Roswell, which was released in 1991, and then in 1994 he said, no, really, the truth about the UFO crash at Roswell. And this is where Frank Kaufman's testimony begins to permeate the whole Roswell story and takes it to an area where it doesn't belong. But today, that author, Kevin D. Randall, says that he has to admit that even today, we still don't have the extraterrestrial. They don't have the crash flying saucer. All they have is a story about the debris. And this is the story by Bill Moore that I spoke about. His original testimony from Marcel in 1980 is now refuted when he said that they swapped out the real debris in the photos for weather balloon debris. Marcel never said that, and Bill Moore admitted that he changed that. So, anyways, on we go. This is the morning of July 10th, 1947. We're in the midst of a full-blown UFO flap. The story's been walked back at Roswell. John Jansen, who is the editor of the Daily Record, which is an American aviation journal, flying his own plane from Morristown Airport to New Jersey, sees 6 luminous spherical craft with hazy rings around them flying in a trail high in the sky above him. He grabs his camera, shoots a picture, but is only able to get 4 of the 6 objects in the image frame. 2 weeks later, on the 23rd of July, he had another encounter of what looked like to him the same or very similar aircraft. He was again flying his airplane out of Morristown and was at 6,000 feet. One thing you'll see is a lot of witnesses have repeat encounters. And that's not to say that they're repeat liars, but it's to say that perhaps, and I was told when I was in Gulf Breeze, because they didn't trust me, that I'm not at the right vibrational rate to see UFOs. Amongst the other things we're working on, right? So, in fact, when I went to Gulf Breeze, and just let me back up, this is 1997, the 10th anniversary of these dramatic photographs taken by a man by the name of Ed Walters. They're seeing, look, there's UFO. And Gulf Breeze, Florida is like, there's Pensacola Naval Air Station, you have the International Airport, you have Hurlburt Field, which is Softly Field, Duke Field, you have so many military air installations. I said, that's an airplane. No, it's not. You must be with the government. Oh, it's whatever. I think I went out and had Mexican that night and just went home the next day. So this is a photograph taken, 3 Army Air Force veterans reported 6 flying discs over Catalina Island in California in 1947. Former aerial photographer Bob Jung said that he succeeded in photographing one of the objects, and you can see the mast from a steamer here. Again, your own interpretation. Here's a cylindrical object photographed over New York City on March 20th, 1950. This is a famous one taken by Paul Trent, McMinnville, Oregon, May 8th, 1950. His wife spotted a strange object in the sky. These images were published in a local newspaper in McMinnville, Oregon. Now this is, and soon after, the Trent photos were published in Life magazine and went worldwide. Now this is one, and I've seen copies of the originals, but there's other photographs in the sequence. And this is one where I go, I just don't know that he would hoax this and why he would want to do this. Another famous UFO photograph. Guy Marquand Jr. took this picture near Riverside, California, November 23rd, 1951. And he said the object above the skyline was a flying saucer. Again, you can see the same patented shape there. It looks like a hat. Another one looks almost similar to that. An amateur photograph of a UFO taken in Peoria, New Jersey, July of 1952. So you're going to see a flap, which is a series of UFO sightings they call UFO flaps, in July of 1952, and we'll go to the most dramatic one in a second. But they all look the same. So either somebody, and I told the story before we went on, when I had a Volkswagen hubcap when I was a kid, probably 11 years old, and with my brothers, we threw it up in the air, and my dad took photographs, and they looked just like your classic UFO. But what type of object is that where everybody's throwing it in the air and taking photographs? And I don't know. They didn't have Pokemon Go back then. Here's one, this is July 19th, 1952. Customs Inspector Domingo Troncoso took this picture in the jungle frontier between Peru and Bolivia. It's flying low in the sky, and it's leaving some sort of mist or contrail. Famous photograph. And then, over some say three successive weekends in July of 1952, people say if UFOs or aliens come here, why don't they go to Washington, D.C. and say, take me to your leader? Well, in the 1950s, there was a series of flying saucer type, alien type films that were released. And these photographs were taken, some say the reflections of streetlights in Washington off of the lens, but where UFOs were purportedly seen over the White House, the Capitol building, and the Pentagon, and that Washington National Airport and Andrews Air Force Base picked them up on their radar screen, both the weekend of July 19th and July 26th, 1952. Some even say that as early as July 12th. But ironically, 50 years later, in 2002, people photographed UFOs over the Capitol building on the same day. But they still remain unexplained to this day. This is a color one. This was seen on the History Channel. I believe that this is touched up. This photograph is touched up because I had only seen black and white photographs of this particular image up until the History Channel came out with its documentary. Here's one here. This is four Sicilian men watching two UFOs over Sicily on December 10th, 1954. This one here is taken in South Africa, July 17, 1956. 7 images taken by a well-respected member of the South African Society in Drakensberg Mountains. The photographer maintained her story until... Oh, I'm sorry?
I have been there.
To Mars? To Rosetta Natal, South Africa. But you didn't...
In the Drakensberg.
Oh, okay. In South Africa. Did you go on safari there? Or?
No. We stayed right at there. We had gone there. I was with South Africans. I was there. It was fun.
I bet. But were you there on July 17, 1956?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. But I was in Pensacola, Florida in 1997. I didn't see, but it is a nice area. My parents have been there. This here is Ella Louise Fortune. She's a Mescalero Indian on the Mescalero Indian Reservation near Three Rivers, New Mexico. She took this along Highway 54 on October 16th, 1957. How ironic is that? Nearly 60 years to the day, near Holloman Air Force Base. This is a famous one taken on January 16th, 1958, Trinidad Island, Brazil. Widely originally dismissed as a hoax, but now some have expressed doubts about this conclusion. Again, it's one that, let me just go back. You can see the image enhanced, again, discoidal in shape. This is one of the many UFO photographs taken in Japan. This one shows an object in Kazuka in 1958. This one here, taken on December 22nd, 1958 in Poland. This is taken by Trevor Constable at Giant Rock, California, where the contactee movement in the 1950s, where people claim to have been in contact with alien beings there at Giant Rock out in the desert. Here is another famous photograph taken by Joseph Seigel on June 18th in Waikiki in Hawaii, June 18th, 1959. This is taken on July 3rd, 1960. Argentinian Air Force Captain Hugo Niati near Cordoba, Argentina. Another one, this is taken somewhere in the United States on June 10th, 1964. It's amazing. We don't know where or by who, but we know the date. This is similar to another contactee, George Adamski, who in the 1950s from New Jersey took these series of spectacular UFO photographs, and they looked almost identical to these images. Here's one taken by Alan Smith, a 14-year-old, at 1:45 a.m. on August 2nd, 1965. What are you doing up at 1:45 a.m., Alan Smith? You're only 14. No, 5 other witnesses also saw the UFO change color from white to red to blue-green. This one here was photographed in Australia over Adelaide in 1965. It apparently hovered for 20 minutes, shot off to the east. This is a famous one taken by Rex Heflin, an Orange County highway inspector. He's at work in a county vehicle on August 3rd, 1965. And this is another one that you could go, what did he stand to gain by publishing this except scorn and ridicule? He saw a hat-shaped object hovering above the road, grabs his Polaroid camera, and took 3 photographs of the metallic-appearing object. This is the best one. Here's a color photograph, 1965. Now, 1965 was a huge UFO flap, arguably across the United States. And also, I'd like to say there was also one in the spring of 1966. But on the night of August 2nd, 1965, thousands of people in 4 Midwestern states witnessed spectacular aerial displays by large formations of UFOs. This was taken in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was extensively analyzed and published in Life magazine. Here's one taken in Switzerland, airport at Zurich. It was taken by Swiss Air pilot Ferdinand Schmid. 2 glowing orbs traveling horizontally, emitting some sort of vapor or light trail here. And again, as I mentioned, there was a UFO flap in the spring of 1966. Here's one taken from C-47, marvelous airplane, Skytrain, taken in July of 1966 over the Rocky Mountains in the morning, just 40 clicks southwest of Provo. The Condon Commission, which was a scientific commission formed in the 1950s and then later would evolve, another government-sponsored project known as Project Blue Book, would try to analyze UFO reports and try to quantify them, qualify them, and dismiss them. But the Condon report said, the Condon Commission said that this was just an object that was thrown into the air. This here is, and I'm not going to get into alien abduction. I was one of the final people to interview Betty Hill from the famous alien abduction with her husband Barney in 1961, and that is online on YouTube. But this is called the Ilkley Moor alien. Apparently, this was taken by a policeman, a retired policeman, who says that he was encountered by an alien, okay, who has hair worse than me, and he was claimed to have been taken aboard an unidentified flying object, and he managed to snap this photograph of an unknown alien being. Now here's one, and again, you gotta go, really? But this is apparently 2 UFOs photographed by Eric Thomason above Maslin Beach in Adelaide, South Australia on March 10th, 1993. Could easily be hoaxed. It could be a remote control vehicle. He said he was looking out to sea when he saw the UFO rise from the waves and fly towards him. Later, a second smaller UFO appeared and came to join the first one. Let's look at some video and we'll wrap it up here. This is a UFO seen in Japan by some hikers. There is no audio. Can you see that okay? A lot of UFO sightings come out of Japan, especially in the years 1992 through 1996. There, this band of lights, a bead of lights above the mountain. So, I have no explanation for that. Did anybody hear about the Phoenix lights that took place in March of 1997? Where they said that there were flares that were dropped by the Air Force, and people reported seeing this enormous V-shaped aircraft black out the stars as it passed over, something that flares couldn't do, but it reminds me of that. So, interesting. Now, I love space shuttle UFOs, Apollo UFOs, international space ship UFOs, and let's just look at this. This is taken as of December 22nd, 2008, when this was released. The government has not come forward.
We got somebody at the front window with a pair of binoculars and a zoom lens.
Volume 55.
It's the alien lady from the TV. Copy that. So it looks amazingly like those hat images that we saw from the 1950s. And I can't test them.
We're in the process of taking pictures with the 400. We got several other pictures as well, but the best view we got was through the binoculars.
So you can take audio from one mission and put it against a video and alter the entire context of the film. Just want to keep that in mind.
Or with some metallic-looking type of cloth, a structure that's definitely not rigid, or it's not a solid metal structure. It also has some type of grounding strap coming off of it, a copper line, what appears to be a grounding strap. Doesn't look like anything I've ever seen on the outside of the shuttle, that's for sure. Okay, copy, that helps, thanks.
Copy that. Thank you. So again, astronauts have reported unidentified flying objects on Apollo missions, Soyuz missions, space shuttle missions, and ISS missions.
We actually can't see it anymore, Brent.
Okay. This is one of my most fascinating videos. It's called the tether footage. And essentially what they're releasing is this long cylindrical object in space. And again, this is the International Space Station, okay? And you can see these weird orbs and objects floating about. Now, some could be debris, but what's out in outer space above the Earth, you can see them flashing. It's just very peculiar. Okay, that could be a meteor.
Day passes. Typically, when the orbiter is on the dark side of the Earth, as it is
Thunderstorm.
now, at least for the next 5 to 6 minutes, the low light level black and white cameras,
There's an object. Check this out.
are much better at observing
And these other objects on the left,
the surface and the stars.
and how they seem to come in and then
Passes,
level out.
high overhead.
Again, not
When
meteors.
the orbiter moves within a daylight pass, the color cameras in the payload bay are used to
Look at all the objects
more
above the Earth's surface here. And again,
interesting
these
sights,
things come in
on
like
the day
this,
side of
and
the
then they
Earth.
go up. Whoops, sorry. I interrupted transmission. And just so you know, that when astronauts report anomalous objects, NASA tends to cut its feed. So this is an EVA, extravehicular activity, a spacewalk.
Yeah, we think the camera filter came off the mark. It's about your 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock going away. Don't worry about it.
Mission Control Houston, we are using the payload bay cameras right now to hopefully catch a glimpse of the Russian space station Mir as it performs an on-orbit burn. Though it will be difficult to pick Mir out from the stars as they pass behind us, the payload bay cameras are positioned such that they're looking straight back
Was that Mir?
straight back behind the orbiter.
Look at these
where
objects.
Mir
What are
is flying
these?
about 850 nautical
Look at all these bright lights. Now, could be space debris, could be satellites, but satellites move.
No joy from here. Sorry. Hope it was a good one, though, for our friends.
Thank you, sir. We could not see it here either. We'll wait 2 or 3 more minutes till sunrise, and then at that time give you a go for KU stow.
So what are these objects?
Mission lapse time of 7 days, 13 hours, and 7
Now again, they're going around the Earth.
Mission Control Houston.
You have geosynchronous and geostationary satellites. And correct me if I'm wrong, military people, but geostationary are communication satellites. Geostationary are military. Geosynchronous are communication. One stays in orbit as the Earth rotates, the others follows the Earth's rotation. Spy satellites normally do not follow the Earth's rotation.
Okay, the Mir space station is the small flashing light in the center, about an inch from
Camera Charlie on the monitor.
the left-hand side of the screen. It's slowly,
That's it? Is that it?
Now, on the camera.
it is slowly moving closer to the left-hand side and is has a very light flashing to it.
the screen way to the left-hand side. We think you can see a flashing light.
Is that mirror?
Just a little bit to the left of the
Is
center
that
of the
mirror?
screen.
Is that mirror? Is that mirror? What are these? What are these objects? Pretty strange. Look at these objects here. Oops.
Yeah, we do see something flashing visually, but we're not sure that might be...
What's this over in the lower left-hand corner? I don't see these things at night when I look up.
Control Houston, once again, we believe we were just able to spot the Mir spacecraft as it flies about 850 nautical miles behind us.
I saw like 6 mirrors. Mir also re-entered several years ago and burned up. By the way, Tiangong-1, the first experimental Chinese space station. They've launched Tiangong-2 in September 2016. Tiangong-1, they've lost control. It's supposed to re-enter the Earth sometime soon, within the next few months, early 2018. And some scientists say that it won't burn up entirely in the upper atmosphere and that perhaps pieces could come to the Earth as large as 200 pounds. Wear a helmet. So here you see space station, okay? And just these strange objects. I just wanted to bring this to your attention, like this is just a feed, and I just have no explanation for these objects. I don't know. I've been accused of being in outer space, but I don't know what's out there in terms of the objects, how satellites go. I know that they would have to move the space station if a small particle the size of a marble was approaching them. And normally NORAD, or the former NORAD, at Cheyenne Mountain can track debris to the size of a marble. So I'm going to move this up just a bit, right? You can just see the space station there, right? And then you can see, what's this flashing orb here? Okay, coming towards the station. Anybody? Look at that. What is that? I don't know, it looks just, so it has, and then what's that? Okay, so now I want to get to the tether footage. Don't leave here all night. Okay, so here, now look at these objects. This is a long arm. I'm not sure what application it was used for, but look at all these objects swarming around it. I'm going to go back, see if they zoom in. They zoom in. Space bugs. Okay, so here we go. Watch. Ready?
Reporting that the crew can see the tether and see.
They call it the tether. Okay. So they've launched this from from their payload bay, and these objects seem to swarm about them, like you said, like bugs around a lamp on a hot summer night. It's bizarre. See that pass in front of it? All these objects. What are they? Are they solid? Is this some sort of discharge from the International Space Station? But they seem to be swarming about. I have no explanation for this, and I'm sure that somebody more competent in aerospace could explain what these are. But they look like they're cylindrical donut holes. See, look at the holes, and look, what are those? They look like donuts. There's holes in the center of them. Bizarre. And this is a legit film released by NASA. I have no explanation. So, and you can see they're just, they seem to be different distances away from the camera. And you see fixed objects here. These are obviously stars, right? They're just holding them.
So if this is NASA film, how come NASA doesn't give an explanation of it?
Why would they want to? That opens up Pandora's box. Because then the other, I was going to say UFO investigators. I believe in unidentified flying objects. I don't believe in UFO investigators. There. Just like I believe in ghosts, I don't believe in ghost investigators. But they'd have to pander to every legitimate UFO researcher, to every whack job in terms of explain everything. It's best zip it. Ignore it. And it'll go away. And it has. This footage is what, 14 years old, 13 years old? And it's not available commercial anymore. It's on YouTube, but I remember when it first came out, I got the VHS from somebody that copied it. There are people that watch this feed all day long, by the way. Talk about boredom. All day long. And every day. So, and they'll catch stuff. Like this was shown at, 2107 in 35 seconds. Look at this object go by. Wow.
The west coast of northern.
So anyways, we get the picture. So I think I just want to conclude with the Dome of the Rock footage. This is 2011. This is in Israel. And supposedly, now again, everything that I see on the internet, I say, wait, you can make special effects. January 28, 2011, a UFO apparently is over Temple Mount in Jerusalem over the Dome of the Rock. And apparently there's corroboration from 4 or 5 different angles. Is that Santana? So here this is Israel, this is Jerusalem, right? These 2 different videos, see? This is perplexing, or it's a massive hoax orchestrated by 5 different people. So some sort of light hovers. It's taken from different angles. And what these people were doing out at that time of night, aiming their video cameras at the specific place. Just saying. So this object hovering. Whoa. Flash and then it blasts off. Here's the 3rd video. Taken from another angle. You go up to that hill, you go up to that hill, you go up to that hill. At 10:17. Yeah. American tourists from their hotel room, okay.
UFO? Holy shit.
Well, sorry.
Oh, that's cool. You can almost hardly.
No audio. Sorry about that. So, this is taken from a hotel room. They just happened to be videotaping at night. Is that a UFO? Ready? And, oh, I want to hear the, whoa, ready? Wait for it. So, anyways, I think I'll close on that. But I want to thank you all so much. CBS News recorded some UFOs, but this could be, well, CBS News credibility is at stake right now, so we're not going to look at that. I want to show you some hoaxes, and then we'll close. Here's I think this is a hoax. A guy takes a videotape of a helicopter with apparently a UFO between it, two helicopters. Okay. I just think it's a blatant hoax. Let's try it again. Ready? Now, to me, what's a Chinook flying in formation with this helicopter so close? And they're escorting a UFO. Wrong type of aircraft to escort a UFO if it's hostile, or so. I just think this is a hoax. It was superimposed there. And then this one gives me a laugh. The next one.
Hey, Tom, get over here and look at this. Maybe that's a new plane?
So, 2 767s, which maybe were tankers flying that close.
Looks like 2 planes in a triangle.
Yep, and you need acting lessons.
Trying to find it. Where did they go?
Where did they go? So anyways, that was a hoax. So anyways, I want to thank you so much for coming out here tonight. I'm sorry that I went over. Thanks to the folks watching at home. My name's John Horrigan. Thank you.
Wednesday at 1 o'clock talking about Bay State Chronicles Unsolved Mysteries from 1620 to the present.
And I promise to compact that within 47 minutes and use my hockey announcer's voice to get to the. It's called Bay State Phantoms. It is a survey of all odd occurrences in Massachusetts from the year 1620 up until the present time. Out-of-place animals like phantom cougars, which I saw personally, to UFOs, to Bigfoot, to ghosts, to odd creatures, the Bridgewater Triangle, yada, yada, yada. You must come to see it. So does anybody have any questions that I can evade or give some sort of pointless, meaningless answer to? Great. Well, yes, sir.
Have they, has anything ever come from the sky listening devices?
Has anything come from the sky listening devices? I'd like to buy a vowel.
You'd like to what?
I'd like to solve the puzzle.
Okay.
Has anything come from the sky listening devices? As if a telephone fell out of a
Listening to the sky noise and then sending.
Oh, okay, so you're talking about radio astronomy. Right, and the very large array that you have in Socorro, New Mexico, Arecibo, in South America, they're listening to those signals all the time. Now, the big ear in Ohio State, which is no longer assembled, this radar array, obtained something that one of the radio astronomers wrote in a margin, WOW, W-O-W, because it was a strange, pulsating sound, for lack of a better explanation, that they could not explain. Recently, in the past year or so, I always say of them that they are detecting signals that they can't explain, but they hold them close to the vest. There is a program called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, and maybe they have data that they aren't disclosing to the public. But I've been to also went out to West Virginia to Green Bank Telescope. I've been there. Very large array, Arecibo, and there's one in Harvard, Massachusetts too as well for Harvard University. So they're listening continually for strange signals. And again, if I use my reference in the Jack Benny show, being out past the nearest star right now, it takes time. Light travels, what is it, 1.8 trillion miles per hour? Work on that one, per hour. So and we're talking light years. And there was a star that I was looking at the other day, 260 years old, and trying to explain to my wife this is probably that light left that star, 10 years before the Civil War began. So, I mean, it's just vast distances. So they're listening, and again, if they came here, they'd be advanced, and they'd probably be clandestine and observing. Let's see, okay, what do? They manufacture, pollute, procure, consume, dispose. What do? They manufacture, they pollute, they procure, consume, dispose. Oh, good human. I mean, look at where we are. Really, we are so primitive. I mean, that's all we do, and we've destroyed the planet. And I don't want to get into an argument pro or con about global warming. The term that I like to use is artificially induced climatic aberrations. Okay, that's what I use. Okay, so but just to think that we're not polluting. There's 3 times as many automobiles on the earth, 3 times as many commercial aircraft flying since 1980. All of the green and unleaded gasoline that we've used in the United States has been reversed in Asia and in Russia because they use leaded gasoline. I could go on and on. Another lecture, but yeah, we are very primitive. And like I said, when I get into my Toyota and drive 65 miles per hour, I'm the most cutting edge, advanced entity in the entire universe. Well, if that's the case, that guy failed, and I don't think he's got game. So he's the master professor, and for him to put us at the center of the universe, wow, we got work to do. We got real work to do. All right, I'll get off the pedestal. So thank you very much. Peace.